Hey everyone, welcome to Fringe Features. I'm Christine Treglia from the Wilbury Theatre Group and Fringe PVD, and I'm joined right now by the fantastic Erik Ehn, who is hanging out in New Mexico right now. Hi Erik, how are you?
Hello, I'm doing really well.
So for those of you watching, you may be familiar with Erik. He was here in Providence, and we had the good fortune at Wilbury Group of working with him on a piece maybe, 5 years ago?
I guess, yeah.
I think something like that. So you might have seen some of his work, but some of you might not know anything about Erik. So I'd like to start there. Erik, tell us a little bit about what you're doing currently and kind of what got you to where you are now.
Well, let's see. I was young and happy in Providence, and I wish I had both my feet back there and not just my face. I loved my time in Providence. I was teaching at Brown and working at Wilbury, and that was a happy pair of things to be engaged with. But increasingly in my writing and in my teaching, theological questions were coming up, about questions about absolute meaning or social justice or the purpose of things, and kind of the technologies of spirituality, the ways you pray or how you imagine things that are unimaginable, how you speak about things that are unspeakable. All of that was kind of bubbling up inside of me. So I decided to go back to school for a theology degree, and that took me to Berkeley, where I was for a couple of years, which is a lovely place. And coming out of that, I wanted to get back into academia in a kind of more open-ended or sideways sort of way. And a friend, Greg Moss, who's a wonderful playwright, was going on sabbatical here, and so there was a kind of temporary opening at University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. And my brother lives out here. He's lived out here for 30 years. My mother lives in Oklahoma, so I like the Southwest. The right time and the right place to jump into after life as a grad student again. So I'm still teaching and writing and thinking and meeting people.
Awesome. And so for people who might know, you have a ton of work that you've written over the years that they can find, not too much, but just meaning, you really like to just keep creating things. I think that's, you're always willing to try something, and I think you have a really specific style of storytelling. Your use of language is very not literal. So I think when people encounter your work at first, the language, I think, is one of the things that they'll recognize first. There's a poetry to it. There's a symbolism to it. Like, I love how you use your words to kind of create a vision for people. So can you talk maybe a little bit about if that is something that you're still using a lot in your writing today, and maybe how you use the medium of writing plays to create what you create?
Let's see. Well, the image that comes to mind is a fruit fly. That I do write a lot in the way that a fruit fly buzzes around a lot. There's a sense that there isn't much time to be a fruit fly. There isn't much time to be a person. You lead with your face. You lead with your curiosity and your probity. But in order to move and live and be, you've got to buzz all the time. And writing for me is like the flapping of a fruit fly's wings, that I'm alive as long as my wings are pumping, as long as I'm writing. And it keeps my curiosity advancing through the world. So writing or plays, in a way, takes us back from our foregrounded perceptions that we see and kiss and speak and knit our brows and purse our lips. Our faces are at the forefront, but theater slows us down or takes us a step back, literally takes us to our back where our wings are, and invites us to consider what our motor really is. What's sustaining us? What's making all this thinking possible, or all this understanding and all this driving possible? So the content of writing is not the language of the social intercourse. It's not the language of intelligibility. It's this buzz. The language I'm after is this kind of ripping sound. This contemplation and panic combined that floats us through the world. So the appropriate language of theater for me is sublinguistic and urgent.
Like almost primal. I think there's so much about your writing where even though we might not understand the words that are entering our ears, we understand the feeling that they're making happen in us. And you know, you invite your audiences to really live in that space where when you have that feeling, to really explore where that feeling is coming from and you know, how that feeling manifests inside each one of us.
Well, when it works, and then when it doesn't, it's just boring. But ideally, it works like listening to a stream works, which on one level is this, it's varied and musical and kind of flows along. On another level, it has more in it. That buzzing sound has more variety in it than normal speech does. So somebody like Annie Dillard, who could sit by a stream and write a book out of 5 minutes by a stream. I guess that kind of density or that primal aspect that you're talking about is what I'm after. It's what I aspire to.
It's great. And you know, kind of tied into that, I know that with both your theological practices and studies and your playwriting practice, something that you find important is the use of silence in your process. And do you want to maybe share with people watching, you know, how that influences you and how you use that as a tool?
They or people, it has been said that all art aspires to music, and you could say, like with John Cage, that all music aspires to silence. That what one is after is after that kind of unified field experience of sound, where everything is possible in one vibration. And silence, I'm interested in silence not as a shutting up, but as the perfection of a note, where all things are possible in this dynamic silence, this charged moment of silence. So we worked at Wilbury, we worked on Beckett, and Beckett is inspiring in terms of his appreciation for silence, or Cage and his appreciation for silence. It finds its way into my work in a variety of ways, you know, pauses or mystery, metaphor that doesn't really resolve itself, or subjects that are hard to calm in yourself, you know, oppression or political discord. All it can do is kind of vibrate inside of you. It's so large. But then I also I've been leading silent retreats, and ideally for writers, and ideally that would become my life, where I could be silent for many months out of the year and just be with writers in a generative space. another way that moves into this Wilbury Tricklock collaboration is this play Sound, where the subject of the play, in a sense, is that vanishing point where the perfect sound and the perfect silence meet each other.
It's interesting. So let's go for a minute, because we talked about this a little bit before we started, and I'm talking with all the artists about kind of how their art has changed during this pandemic. But obviously, you know, you've been very comfortable with isolation and silence throughout your practice. So, you know, what has being in a moment in time where everybody is being a little more isolated, how has it kind of changed your work on this specific piece, or how have you had to adapt this piece to what it's going to look like in this digital format?
Yeah, good questions. Well, something we also touched on was the just acknowledging the call to compassion that is really live right now. That there's the quirkiness, and there are even the benefits of this new rhythm of life, or a slower pace. That is one at the cost of a lot of human suffering, and I think we're awake to that as well. And that, I guess, does go to the larger picture, where the hope in this time, and I think there's a lot of hope. I think there's a lot of hope for the theater and for social activism. In this imposed silence, in this kind of masking of ourselves, or this erasure of our faces, there's a deep listening that's going on. And I think that's what precipitates these large, dynamic protests. That collectivity, I think, is triggered by this listening, that we're really sensitive to each other right now, and coming together all over the world around simple, mysterious, and inevitable ideas like justice, and so on. So that affects this piece, where there are the habits of making theater, where you set up a schedule and you show up in a room and everybody memorizes lines and you walk around. That's a play. The mysteries of theater revealed right there. But we have to re-examine, I guess, or reinvent for ourselves what theater is and what liveness is. And the essence of theater for me is mutual awareness, is a vulnerability to each other, an ecological sense of our dependence on each other. So I listened to, in my heart, on whom I was very dependent, and I'm dependent on Wilbury. The friends I made there are profound. So I wanted to reach out to Wilbury, and then I wanted to reach out locally too. That Tricklock is a company I'd heard about for many years. And getting to know them, they've just thrown doors open in such a beautiful way. So I wanted to defy geography and time in ways that we're allowed to now, in the Zoomification of the universe, and bring Wilbury and Tricklock together. Then, under the umbrella of these interests in sound and silence, I thought Tricklock would make a silent movie, and then Wilbury would do the sound, and you'd put them together. A marriage made in heaven.
So yeah, you just went to my next kind of line of questioning, which was, how audiences can expect to maybe experience this, because like you said, you're going to create a silent film of the script out in Albuquerque, and then it is going to be voiced by musicians and actors here in Providence. So is there anything you even know yet about, what that might look like to the audience when they're watching it?
Well, we're developing it really fast, and we're going to make it as pretty as we can. So we're going to make as good looking a movie as we can in like 48 hours, with as much pre-planning as possible, and gumption, and handheld cameras and things. Try to make that as good as possible. And then I'm working via Zoom with these people I share a vocabulary with in Providence, some actors who've been in previous pieces. And we're going to try to make that as sensual or as delightful as possible, with some songs and whatnot. It's a relatively short piece for me, so it should be, I'm guessing, 40 minutes or somewhere in that neighborhood. And since it goes pretty fast, the story is meant to be pretty straightforward. But knowing how things go down, if I sat down with the audience one at a time and talked through the play page by page, it would still be inscrutable. So we're trying to tell a story, a pretty straightforward story with talking whales and robot pie and whatnot. So it's got its quirks, but it's meant to be a story. At the same time, understanding that the stories I write tend to go by pretty quickly, I'm at least trying to give it a sweetness as it goes down. So even if you don't get the story in a way you can talk about, hopefully there'll be other pleasures you can delectate.
Yeah, I can say from firsthand experience, I was lucky enough to work with you back in Providence, or here in Providence. And yeah, I think the collective agreement amongst our group, the first time we read it, was kind of like, huh. And then as we started the process, through the time, it's almost like you forget the words you're saying, and it, through the process, everything was so crystal clear to us as actors. And it was kind of letting yourself be open to know that when you were performing this, even though it was completely crystal clear to you inside what was being said and done and happening, the audience doesn't have all those weeks of discussions that we had. And so it was really important for us to convey that, like you said, that feeling that at the end is really just what the hope for the audience is, that even if they can't talk linearly about what they just saw, they can talk about the feelings that they had, or the questions that arose, which I think we don't get a lot in theater. I think a lot of pieces that we go and see in traditional theaters, we walk out and, like you said, we can tell the story, we can tell what happened, we can tell who the character was. And I think it's always great for audiences to experience something where they have to kind of sit with it for a little bit of a longer period before they can figure out what it meant to them. And I think it's worth giving people that opportunity to live in that space where they don't have a clear answer to why they're feeling what they're feeling.
Yeah, that's right on the mark. You guys were humbling with your trust, and I love the work you did. I think you really got the piece. I spent a lot of time alone as a kid, like maybe a lot of people did, and you entertain yourself, you make up these elaborate games. And I think my plays, again, when and if they work, are like looking at a child lost in an adventure. And looking at the child, you don't always know what adventure that child is on. But you can see in that child's concentration that child is perfectly a child, and that there's some kind of delight in that. Maybe you could talk to the child later and find out, they were on the moon or whatever. But I'm okay with kind of that level of engagement. The inner workings or the precise details of the story may be elusive, but that sense of identity and uh, creative heart that if that can live for the audience, then I'm a step on the journey, I think.
And can I ask you a little bit, so again, knowing from my firsthand experience, just, the way you work when you're directing your own piece and you're working with a group of artists is a very specific type of work, in how, like you said, you rely on a collaborative energy, you rely on people really opening up, trusting each other, and developing. Like, a lot of your work develops through the process. And so I can imagine, with not being able to be in a room together during that process, maybe you can help all of us. I don't know if you've got any answers yet, but have you found some new ways to tap into that kind of energy through a digital format that has been working for you?
I'm liking this movie making idea that some great stuff is going on Zoom, and the way people are playing with the medium and working with their own resistance to the way it is. I admire a lot of that's going on, but for myself, I guess, since I'm after synthesis, like the vibration of a perfect sound or the disappearing into silence, since I'm after kind of congruence, and since, as you suggest, the plays are kind of a scaffold or jungle gym that the audience and the actors can play on, I want more control over structure than Zoom with its, in some circumstances, its charming glitchiness. I'm looking for something a little more streamlined. So that's why I'm hoping to give the audience a very intentionally composed film rather than a Zoom encounter. Then the live aspect becomes the kind of response to the film. So making a movie is one way of working with some kind of disciplinary precision, and then working with people on the Providence end of things, working with people that I trust, and there's a kind of unspoken vocabulary that I think people feel licensed to fly. I hope.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, is there kind of anything else that you want to talk about today about this specific show or life in general?
Well, I encourage people to look at how Wilbury and Tricklock and theaters at that vanguard level, how they're behaving right now. And there is a strong sense of public responsibility and almost a beautiful desperation to find ways of holding people together during these times. There's the cunning that keeps theaters at this level alive always is really elevated during these times of crisis. And always the kind of the rubric of a community is how they take care of each other. And the way Wilbury is taking care of its own and Tricklock is taking care of its own is there are lessons for society at large in these theaters. So.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think it was definitely, Fringe especially, always felt like a thing of itself, and it was already this thing on the outside of theater. So the idea of not trying to do it in some format this year just really never crossed our mind. We never had are we going to cancel conversation? We had how are we going to make this work right now kind of situation. And we're so thankful to artists like you who are willing to say, okay, yeah, let's try something. So we're glad that over the summer, while we might not have the normal summer that we're used to and the normal festival that we're used to, that we can still present so much of this amazing work. So I want to remind our audiences that if you want more information about the show Sound, you can visit the artist page here on the Fringe website. And I urge you to go and visit Tricklock Company's website, learn more about them, and obviously the Wilbury Group. Hopefully you've met us. Please donate directly to the artists. We're very thankful that Erik has said that he would donate the proceeds to the Fringe so we can continue to be making the Fringe. So when you donate to this show, that is what you're donating to. And again, Erik, I just want to thank you so much for giving us some of your time this afternoon. And it was great talking to you again.
It's always a pleasure. I look forward to sharing like a genuine bratwurst and like being in actual space. But in the meantime, I'm grateful for this space.
Great. All right, enjoy, folks.